Welcome to the Modern Assyrian program on ANB SAT. My name is Carmen Morad. Today we're privileged to be on the beautiful campus of Stanislaus State University with Dr. Stacey Fahrentold, Director of the Sargis Modern Assyrian Heritage Project. Dr. Stacey Fahrentold is an assistant professor of history with a PhD from Northeastern University in 2014 and a BA from Georgia State University in 2007. Her specialty fields include modern Middle East, Syria and Lebanon, migration, displacement, and refugees, Ottoman history, and Mediterranean history. At Stanislaus State University, Dr. Stacey Fahrentold is the director of the Francis Sargis Project in Modern Assyrian Heritage, an enduring public history project dedicated to supporting new scholarship Assyrian and Assyrian American history. Among other things, the Sargis Project is dedicated to supporting students working to write compassionate social histories of modern Assyrian communities, including those in California's Central Valley. Students who are encouraged in preserving Middle Eastern immigrant stories are encouraged to contact Dr. Fahrentold. The Modern Assyrian Heritage Collection was established when Francis Sargis's generous gift established a fund at Stanislaus State University in 2015 for the purpose of purchasing books and other materials. It was his way of enabling generations of learners to discover and in return preserve modern Assyrian culture. Francis Sargis, who maintained a successful law practice in Santa Barbara, was born in France and came to Turlock in 1947 at the age of 14 with his mother Marleta and sister Flora. After serving in the U.S. Army, Sargis attended Modesto Junior College and earned his bachelor's degree and teaching credentials from UC Berkeley. He entered Hastings College of Law, earned his Juris Doctor from University of Southern California, and his master's degree in law from Yale University Law School. Heritage is a part of us because it is in our genes, Sargis said at the time the fund was established. He also said, "Heritage does not fully determine who we are, but it provides an important marker as to where we started in life." Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I really want to thank you for accepting our invitation, Stacey, if I may call you Stacey.
You may.
We had met earlier last year when Stanislaus State did a beautiful commemoration of the Assyrian Genocide Remembrance, or as we call it, Martyrs Remembrance. And you spoke very eloquently and beautifully. And I wanted to thank you for joining this campus to start the studies. So really want our audiences to meet you, to know a little bit more about you, and for us to know a little bit more in detail about the work that you'll be doing here on campus.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Carmen, if I may, for having me, and I'm honored to be able to tell you a little bit more about the project. Here at Stanislaus State, we were gifted a donation by Francis Sargis to create the first modern Assyrian heritage collection in California. And it's fitting that it would be here at Stanislaus State because this is a community that has a very strong Assyrian population. We also have an Assyrian student population that we're serving on this campus. The library collection was inaugurated in 2015 and curated by librarian Laura French and Dean of Libraries Ron Rodriguez. And the idea was to create a collection that would serve both the Assyrian students on campus, but also the Assyrian community. It's now academic year 2017-2018 now, and my job here is to build, not only on that collection, but to build public historical projects devoted to showcasing that collection, getting students into the historical research using that collection, and really documenting Assyrian history through that collection, and also in collaborations that extend beyond our campus and into the broader community.
For our viewers who aren't familiar with the Modern Assyrian Heritage Collection and Mr. Francis Sargis, can you tell us a little bit of history of how this collection came to be and the actual mission of it with the different activities? And I realize it's separate from the actual projects that will be coming up in later 2018 and 2019, including the fellowship and the international conference and some exciting projects that you can tell us about.
Well, for the collection was originally given through this donation by Francis and Domarina Sargis. The idea was to collect every book that we could find, or rather that Laura French, our very talented and resourceful librarian, could find on Assyrian history in the modern era, broadly construed. So it's a collection that focuses on Assyria and Assyrians, wherever they are, from about the year 8300 to the present. It is a collection that is largely Anglophone, largely in English language, and that the reason for that is because we're hoping to get Assyrian students and young Assyrian Americans into these materials in a language that's readily accessible to them. So we have about 300 books, and it's always growing through donations. Many of them are in English. It is also a multilingual source, so there are sources in Assyrian, in German, in French, other foreign languages. In addition to that, we've got archival materials, collections of private papers, some of them deeply historical, some of them more recent, where there's a collection of 26 oral history interviews, another series of oral history interviews that we're hoping to grow over the next couple of years. And then there's a series of digitally accessible collections, things that students or even community members can come to campus and access on the web. All of this devoted to being the best possible repository for modern Assyrian heritage and history that we can.
You mentioned oral histories. Are those strictly in the Turlock community that those interviews are being conducted? Or, for example, if we have viewers watching now and they would like to contribute, or they would like to maybe perhaps have family members that could be interviewed, give us a little bit more detail about how those oral interviews come to be.
Well, the collection presently has 26 interviews. Those were collected by another researcher a few years ago. We are in the we're in progress to getting the paperwork completed to collect new oral history interviews. There's an institutional review board process that we're in the middle of right now, and we're hoping to start collecting interviews by this fall, and actually to get students participating in this, and hopefully even receiving credit in courses for this. The oral history interviews, as I imagine them, would be open to participants within the Turlock Modesto area, but also beyond it. So if we have viewers that have relatives that are local, or relatives that are across the country or even across the world who would be open to participating in a family history interview with us, we would be eager to pursue that.
We will provide some information within this program, Stacey, to make sure for those who are watching that perhaps they have family members that can share information and contribute and provide some information that could be beneficial to your studies. Let's say someone who's not familiar with these studies, what would they be interested, or how would they be interested in finding out? What kind of interviews? Is it about their struggles? Is it about the Exodus? Is it about the genocide? When I talk about being granddaughter of genocide survivors, there is so much history, there is so much through the generations. What are you finding out that you're including in these studies that is beginning to get the attention of scholars and historians that didn't before?
Well, with the Oral History Project, which is still very much in its infancy, we're targeting a couple things. We are deeply invested in stories of resilience. And that could mean stories of resilience post-ethnic cleansing, stories of resilience post-genocide. It could be stories passed down through the family. When we're talking about populations that are historically displaced, or you know, the granddaughter of genocide survivors, these would be, you know, sort of family stories. So really what I'm looking for, or what we're going to look for, are stories of resilience broadly construed. This could be a narrativization of a post-displacement life or post-genocide life. It could also be a family history narrating the generations of Assyrian life after a trauma or in America. It could also be narrativizing immigrant life in America. And so one of the very strong themes that we're going to be pursuing, because we're here in Turlock and because we sort of envision a lot of our interview participants will be local, is I want to hear stories of resilience about Assyrians living in California and fitting themselves into the communities here, maintaining their cultures, maintaining their language, maintaining their music here in California. But yeah, it's really all about stories of resilience.
And this continues, the resiliency continues as you and I are speaking today. There are families that have been displaced. There are families that are being resettled in our area, and I'm sure other towns, as our viewers have experienced. So the resiliency is an ongoing project with Assyrians through the generations. So it's very exciting that you get to collect these oral histories of previous generations, and hopefully those who are experiencing them now as new immigrants and new refugees. Let's move on to the fellowship. You mentioned the Sargis Fellowship that I'm sure there are students out there that need more information about deadlines, about what the objective is and how they can become qualified.
Right, yeah, so here at Stan State, we have this Sargis Fellowship. We offer it once a year. Right now we're offering one fellowship a year, each spring. We'll hopefully in the coming years grow it, but right now it's one Sargis Fellowship per year. This year's fellowship is $1,500. It's funded by donations from the Sargis family, but also an ad hoc donation by Wilfred Beit Alhas in San Jose. And thank you for that.
Good for him, Mr.
Yes.
Beit Alhas. Great plug for him. He's a great scholar and, a great Assyrian patriot.
He came here and gave a talk, and that was very successful. And he taught some of our students Assyrian language, and we had a wonderful time. And now he's giving back to Assyrian students here on campus. And so the fellowship, it's a $1,500 fellowship for a student who would like to find a way to create an Assyrian history using materials in our collection. So the student, we imagine, would go into the collection, access some of the archival materials, access some of these oral history transcripts, access some of those books, and create some short form projects, narratives. It could be videos, it could be blog posts, it could be discussions of primary sources. What I want to see is compelling stories of resilience, using the materials in our archive. And ultimately, these materials that the students work on, they'll work with me, we'll polish them, we'll turn them into something that we can then deliver to the Assyrian community in a digital exhibit that the Sargis Project is hoping to launch this summer.
That's very exciting. You and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned a very exciting group of young Assyrians on campus. Tell us a little bit about these two groups and how perhaps we can promote some awareness to increase their membership, and how are they connected to your projects?
Well, there are two groups, two young people's groups that are represented on this campus. The first one is Kessia, which is a Central Valley Assyrian Youth Association, which has, I'm gathering chapters all over the Central Valley, but also has representation here at Stan State. And they do a number of outreach projects and a little bit of activism and diversity initiatives. The other group is newer, and it was founded explicitly as a student organization here on campus, and it's called the Assyrian Student Club. The president is Tatiana Oliveira, and they are hoping to put together some events to sort of raise the profile of Assyrian students on this campus. Assyrian students, they're a very well represented numerically community here on this campus, but they're underrepresented in sort of under-recognized as a community on this campus. And so that second group, the Assyrian Student Club, is devoted to raising the profile of Assyrian students through various social activities.
That sounds very exciting. I think since before your project began, there is a lot of awareness and representation that will change, and hopefully we can have a conversation with those two groups and see, you know, how they are doing as far as their membership. What other projects should we look for with the Sargis Modern Assyrian project and collection on campus? And if someone watching today, one of our viewers, would like to make a contribution, whether it's a monetary contribution or oral history contribution or any perhaps books or digital contribution, how would they do that? Who would they contact?
Thank you for that question. We are, the Sargis Project is actively seeking collaborations. Contributions of all kinds are welcome. Probably the best way to get started on discussing a new collaboration would be for someone to email me. And then we would start a discussion about what that looks like. We welcome new books. We welcome you know, people who would like to sign up for oral histories, people who have ideas about where to take this program, because this project is really about helping Assyrians collect and narrate their own history, right? So I want to be a facilitator of that. If you have ideas, email me. That said, we've got a couple of other things that we're doing. We have a speaker series, 1 to 2 academics in Assyrian studies, usually of Assyrian heritage themselves, come to campus and share their newest and most exciting research with us. We had Wilfred Beit Elhas in the fall. This spring, so far, we have Dr. Sargon Donabed, who's going to come from Roger Williams University in March.
March 26th.
March 26th at 4:30 in the afternoon.
We'll provide more information for our
Yes.
viewers in the coming programs.
Yeah, and he will speak about his book, Reforging a Forgotten History, Iraq and its Assyrians in the 20th Century. It's very, very exciting. Looking ahead, we're hoping to build the speaker series into something even larger. And that will look like an international conference planned for spring of 2019, so next academic year, wherein we'll have probably somewhere between a dozen to 15 scholars of Assyrian heritage, history, literatures, languages, from everywhere, from down the street, from Europe, from the UK, from the Middle East even, to come to Turlock and participate in a 2-day event featuring panels, papers, presentations, about the state of the field in Assyrian history and studies. That conference is planned to sort of inaugurate the idea that Turlock, the idea that Stanislaus State is a research center, a locus of activity for Assyrian studies. Yeah, so we're really excited about that. Of course, the digital exhibit that the Sargas Fellow and I will work on will launch in the summer of 2018. We also have a brand new class in Assyrian history offered once a year. That is starting next week. And the students in that class will also contribute to this digital exhibit, and hopefully will contribute to the conference next year as well. So the goal is to sort of take all of these various projects and build them into something that's organic and whole, and which honors the Assyrian experience in the homeland, in the diaspora, in Turlock, at Stan State.
As an assistant history professor, I really think it's important to understand where the motivation and passion comes from when it comes to history. How did you choose to be a historian?
It's a great question, and it's a question that you find yourself reflecting on a lot. Essentially, I got into history because I wanted to find the stories that make us all alike, or the stories that betray how alike we are as people. I started in college at a moment when the United States was going back into Iraq in 2003. I went into college while a lot of my friends were enlisted in the military. And there was a lot of discussion. It was sort of in the popular culture at the moment that people were different, that people from different parts of the world were different, right? And in the media, the media was sort of playing to the ways that it was sort of playing on our differences rather than focusing on the ways in which we're the same. And this was particularly heightened when it came to stories about Middle Eastern immigrants in America, and people who are Americans but are originally from parts of the Middle East. And I wanted to query why that was, because I didn't find it a very convincing sort of popular image. And so as a historian, I'm very much wedded to the idea that if we let people tell their own stories, that there's something that will resonate in those stories that belies our sameness and diversity. Mm-hmm. And so I do this archivally by looking for stories of everyday people, right? Letters between two individuals rather than government documents about them, diaries, memoirs, oral histories, these kind of things. The kind of everyday writings that a lot of historians don't pay attention to, I try to really zero in on, because I believe that what makes history really powerful is when it narrates everyday experience and everyday people. And this is particularly important for Americans of Middle Eastern background. This is a community, the Assyrian community and other Middle Eastern immigrant communities are communities that often get forgotten in our national narrative. They're communities that are often described as new. They're often described as foreign, right? Little is known about them in our national conversation, and that's erroneous. I mean, the Assyrians have been in Turlock and Modesto for over a century. Mm-hmm. They are a thoroughly American community, and we need to have a compassionate and well-written social history of, everyday people to add to that narrative, to show that this is a community with roots here in America.
Mm-hmm. More Assyrians live in diaspora now, today, than in their own ancestral homeland. So what you just described so eloquently, where you articulated the importance of telling stories, not just the important stories that need to be documented and archived from our mothers and fathers and great grandparents, but also today's generation needs
Definitely.
to learn, needs to know these stories. And you beautifully put it when you said everyone has a story, and you want them to tell their own story. So it's imperative that the Assyrian community steps up and supports this program and this project and contributes in any way that they can to make sure that this project is successful and it continues. And different people can do it in different ways. You don't have to be a student to come and enjoy this collection, correct? You can come to the library.
One of the things that's really wonderful about the Sargis collection is that it's out front. It's in the center of the library, and that's an explicit decision that the campus made to put those books right out front, where anyone, whether they're a student or just a member of the community, can come in and access that collection. Yeah.
And more people need to know where it's located. It's on the second floor of the library on campus, and it is open to the public. Thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing all this information with us. In closing, is there anything that you would like to include to make sure, whether it's a contact information, an email, or something that our viewers should know about? Because we will be covering these events that you talked about to make sure that our viewers locally and in our surrounding communities are aware of, and they may attend and take advantage of the speakers, of the conferences, and perhaps their students or kids can enroll and take advantage of the fellowship and how they apply for it. So we will have that information, but from you as someone who was particularly vetted for this position, what have you learned within, because I know your training is as an Arabist. You speak full Arabic, but not Assyrian.
But not Assyrian, right.
So what kind of a unique perspective does that bring into so far what you've done, and what your understanding is about the unique identity of the Assyrians?
Well, and it says something about my positionality, right? So I guess if there's one thing that I'd really like your viewers to know about me is that I see my role here as a facilitator. I believe it's very, very important for Assyrians, whether they're here in Turlock or anywhere in the world, to narrate their history. And I see my role as facilitating in that narration. I'm trained as an historian. I have a background as an Arabist, and I'm not Assyrian myself. And so I'm very aware of that sort of subjectivity. But I do see, I have access to the tools. I am trained in the collection of these types of histories, and I have, I have the training to help a community amplify its voice. And I think that sort of amplification is really, really critical for Assyrians right now, with everything that's happening in the world, politically, but also just with this community, even here in Turlock, with the aging of the older generation and the sort of coming of age of the new generation. It's really, really important that we preserve these stories now, and that hopefully young Assyrians find a space for themselves in that project. If I can help you find your place in that project, that's what I want to do, and that's my role.
Thank you so much for sharing all that information
Thank
and
you.
your unique perspective. We are looking forward for other opportunities to cover the events that you'll be facilitating on campus. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the Modern Assyrian program. We'll see you next time.